Alan Wallendor was sure that he had me, but he was about to find out that he was very mistaken. But still, held that disapproving look, that scowl in my direction. And then suddenly I began to hear giggling. I look over to see Alice covering her mouth with a big smile, trying to contain a chuckle. Hee hee, my dad just got himself into trouble, didn't he, Regimen? She said, still giggling and looking over at me. You already have the look, she said, pointing at my face. For a moment I was a bit confused. I'm not really sure what you mean, Alice, I said, most likely with a puzzled expression. Oh, it's nothing, Reginald. At least nothing that you have to worry about. It's just, whenever you're about to win at something, you always get this cute little smile on your face. It's always the same one. I've actually gotten quite used to seeing it. But that's basically because you win at everything. It doesn't matter whether you're beating someone in chess, talking over business strategies, even when all of the younger kids started playing that game. You know, the one where we made up imaginary businesses, and everyone was assigned an equal amount of monetary assets for them. And the goal of the game was for you to try to negotiate with other players and gain the maximum amount of monetary assets you could. And you, of course, won. You always do. And whenever you're about to lay it on someone, you always get that grin on your face. It's one of the things I love about you. Usually it takes longer, but it looks like my father stepped into it early, Alice said, smiling and turning towards her father. Sorry, Father, but by the looks of it, things are about to go poorly for you, and you're about to find out why Reginald P. Worthington is the only man for Alice Wallengar. For a moment, I stopped to think if I really did have an expression like that. If so, it might be worth looking into. It could be used as a tell, and that's a business disadvantage I don't need. Regardless, I took my bearings and refocused back to Alan Wallengar, who is now looking at me even more disapprovingly. He definitely didn't like that Alice was complimenting me, or saying that he was about to lose. Well, I suppose it really doesn't matter. After all, he is about to lose. I may not have expected to use this so early. After all, I developed this little trick for when I started having deals in the magical world and having to cooperate and deal with people who had magical powers. It's a trick that I made up myself, but all the effort I put into creating it was about to pay off. Okay, Mr. Wallengar, I said, smiling up at him on the other side of his desk. You've put forward a lot of assertions, so I'll try to answer them as aptly as I can, and I simply hope they're to your satisfaction. To start off with, I'm a bit deterred that you think of me as a charlatan, and I would hate for you to feel like you can't trust the things that I say. But luckily for you, and maybe for me, I suppose, I've actually been working on something. I didn't think that I'd have to use it when I came here, but I suppose this is a perfect opportunity, I said, standing up from my chair for just a moment. But first, I'd like to ensure my safety for the moment. I'm far from all-knowing, and I don't understand everything there is when it comes to magic. So, in order to ensure it's safe to do this, I just need to make sure that you don't have any sort of magical defenses. Things that might try to harm me if I cast any sort of magic. I assure you I'm not casting anything on you, or attacking you in any way. I've simply created a spell that could be beneficial to this situation. So, Mr. Wallengar, would it be safe for me to cast here? Alan Wallengar kept his unpleasant expression. So long as you're not attempting to cast a spell on me, it should be fine. But I must say I'm quite interested to see this magic of yours. So, show me, young Mr. Worthington. This should be interesting, to say the least, Alan Wallengar said, slowly adjusting himself in his chair a bit, getting comfortable. As you wish, Mr. Wallendor, I said, raising my hand, and with a little focus on the right spell, Everetta Moscastus, I announced aloud, snapping my fingers. And in a flash of red, a spectral sheet of paper began to form in the air, like an old-style piece of parchment, and it simply floated there, in between me and Mr. Wallendor. It was blank, of course, and had nothing on it. But that was about to change. Okay, Mr. Wallendor, I said. This is actually a very unique spell that, once again, I created on my own. I thought it might come in handy when making deals in the magical world. It's so hard to know if people are actually being straightforward or honest with you. And when you're doing business, knowing that the person you're doing business with is actually giving you the right information can be a powerful asset. So, I came up with this little spell. Basically, all it is a magical contract. One that has a temporary short-term effect on you. Basically, you give the magical contract an instruction, set a rule or a boundary, and so long as you're making contact with the contract, you're bound by whatever rule it sets. Just in case you're wondering how it works, I'll give you a demonstration, I said, smiling, stepping forward closer to the paper. I raised one hand forward with a finger stretched out and began to write on the parchment. Running my fingers across it, a bright light etched the words I was writing into the paper and glowed a brilliant red. The words I wrote? Tell no lies. I looked at Mr. Wallengard. As you see, I've written in an instruction onto the contract. The instruction, tell no lies. So, just as the instruction states, anyone who willingly places their hand on the contract whilst this instruction is in place is incapable of lying. And yes, in case you're wondering, willingness is actually a part of the spell. The spell will only take effect if the person is willing to agree to the terms of the contract. And the spell ends when they remove their hand. So, let's give it a whirl, shall we? I said, raising my hand and placing it against the contract. As I placed my hand against the contract, a dim red glow spread over me and seemed to outline my form, meaning that the spell was taking its effect. As the glow dimmed, I looked at Alan Wallengar, smiling. So, let's begin by answering a few of your questions. First of all, I have no interest in the Wallengar's magical knowledge. And no, your daughter actually wasn't the one to give me magic, so my magical powers were not part of some plot to gain access to your magical knowledge. Quite frankly, Mr. Wallengar, if I had to estimate which one of our families actually had superior access to magical knowledge, I'd say that the Worthington household has the superior advantage, and that's by a very wide margin. Mr. Wallengar, I'm uncertain of what magical resources you possess, but to be truthful, I'm not that interested in those either. I might have some level of interest, but it's far from the level that would cause me to want to steal. And I most definitely wouldn't try to leverage my relationship with Alice to get it. I would of course be willing to barter for some of those resources, but once again, that would be a separate deal, and not in any way be connected with my relationship with Alice. But, to tell the truth, you were probably right on the money when you said Alice pressured me into the relationship. And it was just a business agreement. But that far from means I have no feeling for Alice at all. Before we set the terms to our agreement that I would be her boyfriend, Alice was one of my closest friends, and I do actually care about her. I was a little bit wary when the agreement first started, but actually, after giving it some thought, honestly, I couldn't really think of a better way that Alice could have asked me to be her boyfriend. I know it seems a bit odd, strange, or out of place even, but doing business tends to simply be the way I'm most comfortable doing things. And aside from that, truth be told, I've noticed a number of similarities between a regular business arrangement and a regular relationship. When you get right down to it, a relationship is simply two people who agree between one another on specific things, that they'll behave in a specific manner when it comes to each other, and share things with each other, of course in accordance with their beliefs and the agreement that they set upon, and what's expected from a relationship. To be honest, I've heard a lot of stories about people who get into relationships, and a lot of the stories I've heard usually involve one person or the other being more interested at the start, and having to apply pressure on the other in order to start the relationship. So even in that sense, the way Alice did things isn't really that far outside of normal. The only really abnormal thing about it seems to be more connected to the way I like to do things, the fact that I like to keep things business related. And even then, the difference seems to be more about the way people perceive things than the actual effect. People usually don't call a relationship a business deal, so the fact that me and Alice do is offsetting to people. I suppose it just sounds worse than it is. And quite frankly, as far as the relationship itself goes, just like any relationship, it's an agreement between the two people, the parties involved. And the relationship doesn't end until one of the two parties is dissatisfied and doesn't feel that the other person has been holding to their side of the agreement. Once again, not being that much different from a regular business agreement. And as of yet, I can't really find any complaints about Alice that would justify ending the agreement. You might go with the idea that a relationship is emotional and a business agreement is supposed to be non-emotional, but you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who has no emotions whatsoever about the business deals that they're in. So, quite frankly, at this point, regardless of how the relationship started, I don't have any intentions of breaking up with Alice. For one, as of yet, she's been doing a very good, I suppose you could call it, job as my girlfriend. And Alice seems to be happy, so I hope I'm doing a good job as her boyfriend. At this point, there's nothing to be gained by breaking off the contract. The only thing I'm absolutely sure breaking off the contract would be hurt Alice's feelings. And that's not something that I want to do. So, I'm sorry if it upsets you, but I have no intentions of breaking up with her, I said, taking my hand off of the contract. And as I did, in a flash of red, the contract burned away. I took my seat beside Alice and smiled over to Mr. Wallengard on the other side of his desk, who at this point looked absolutely livid.